this tearing down and building back up of our story, it was beneficial, but it was painful, it was hard. The book has gone through an identity crisis over the past few weeks, and we think that it is coming out from that better than it went in, which is encouraging. But over the past few weeks, it's really felt like we've taken like 5 steps back and then 4 steps forward.
We were looking at one of these major plot points, one of the key transitions, and we understood that this doesn't work. This is not, it's not realistic, and not just in it's sci-fi kind of way, but even in the sci-fi world, we could not make it work within the world we had created.
Without getting into too much spoilers, because this is not a spoiler video, our idea was to have some sort of nuclear disaster. But in researching that, we realized there's just so much regulation about anything nuclear that to have that type of disaster that we needed would just be completely unrealistic as to what happens in the real world.
And I was sharing that with somebody else, and he kind of mockingly said, well, because we know that regulations solve everything. And it's more than just, well, regulations would have kept it from happening. Part of the whole plot point of our book was that the disaster created new regulations, and that was something that impacted other things in the plot.
Right.
And if those regulations would have already been there, then the whole thing goes out the window. And when we looked at that, it made us question how much else in this book have we not figured out? And we realized that we needed to hold our ideas rather loosely.
And that's something that we've always known, but seeing it in practice was a little more painful, because it was all these ideas that we spent all this time figuring out. We're now like, this isn't right. We've got to cut back on some of this and then see what we can add back in.
And it took much longer. It felt like we were just in this hole for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think you said yesterday that like we'd been stuck in the mud, and I said we're not out of the mud yet, but we found the solid ground at the bottom of the mud, so we actually have some traction to move forward.
We're not sinking anymore.
Yes, but one of the things that this process did for me, at least, was it showed me the areas of the book that I am the most attached to, and it's not what I thought those areas would have been 6 months ago. Especially when we look back at where this project started as a book that I started writing years ago. The only thing that has survived from that are the main character's name and the fact that it's about time travel. And I was actually willing to give up even those before I was willing to give up the themes of the book that relate not to science fiction, but to the real world, to personal relationships, and to the message that this book can provide to real people.
And I'm with you mostly on that. I do recognize that there is a danger as authors of going so far being attached to the message and being so loose on the story that the message becomes all important in the writing. And I can't remember whether it was Brandon McNulty or Jed Hearn or who it was. We were watching their video about how not to be preachy in writing. And I think when art becomes preachy, then it loses its ability to have an impact. That's one of the reasons why when I was even thinking about the saga or the story I wanted to write first, I realized that there was so much theme, so much message in there that it needed a lot of story to be able to make it worth listening to and worth watching. So that's an area that we'll want to be careful about.
Right, and I think that probably just even raises the importance of making this disaster something reasonable, because if it's not reasonable, then it feels even more like just a vessel to carry the message and not a good story in and of itself.
Right. And when you're talking about all the things that you're ready to let go of, there are things that I probably should be ready to let go of, but with the exploring that we have done already with our characters, I've started to find myself emotionally attached to them as people, even though they're completely fictional figments of our imagination.
And I wonder how much that attachment changes when it comes to characters versus when it comes to plot, because characters have that interesting where it seems like they affect both the message and the story more than the plot affects. The plot just affects the story, doesn't really affect the message as much as the characters do. Does that make any sense?
I think so, because as you're describing that, I'm realizing that the parts of the characters that I'm emotionally attached to are the parts of the characters that relate to the themes that you're describing, not the parts of the characters that relate to the in-world story. So I think that's a good observation.
Okay. With that being said, that went off on a rabbit trail we weren't expecting. But this tearing down and building back up of our story, it was beneficial, but it was painful. It was hard.
It's still hard.
It's still hard. We're not done with that process yet. And there were times where it just felt like we were making no progress for like a couple weeks. But we're starting to come out, and we think it's better than when we went in.
I know I said I had a C.S. Lewis quote that didn't seem to be related. I just remembered a different C.S. Lewis quote that, and I'm not going to be able to quote it, but he said something like, when you feel like you have to set a story aside and you're giving up on the story, don't throw it away, put it in a drawer. And then when you come back to it, you'll be able to realize, no, this is a story that I can tell and feel compelled to tell. And it felt like we were forced to do that for like 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
Rabbit trail on rabbit trail. I saw somebody online writing something about they found this fan fiction somewhere on the internet that they were reading through, and they were like, wow, this is really good, but this feels like somebody stole my idea of something that I think I wrote a little bit of years and years and years ago, but it's so much better than I wrote it, and its characters are so much more fleshed out, and they got to the end and realized that the story that they were reading through wasn't finished, and they were looking to see who wrote it and like, why didn't this person credit me with their ideas? And then they realized they were the one that wrote it like 7 years ago and had forgotten, and they're like, maybe this story is actually better than I thought it was.
It has legs.
Yep, setting something aside for a while and coming back to it can be beneficial. So when you reach a point like us where you seem stuck in the plot and you have to tear stuff down, what is your strategy? How do you think about the plot in order to start on your way moving forward again? Let us know down in the comments, and we will see you next week.